One day, a beggar was roaming the streets when he saw a little girl wailing and pleading for her grandmother. The poor beggar couldn't bear seeing her in anguish, so he escorted her home, but what he discovered there brought his painful past back to him. Before we continue, please take some time to subscribe to Dailydose, like, and share this video with your friends. Frank Fisher was a homeless man who roamed the streets every day in quest of food and shelter. One day, he was strolling through a park when he noticed a little girl crying alone on the pavement. "Granny, please come and take me home." She kept screaming while crying. It was growing colder, and Frank noted that there was no one around the girl, implying that she was either lost or waiting for someone. He decided to help her. "Oh no!" he gasped as he approached her. "Why is such a beautiful girl like you crying? Little kids shouldn't be crying. Only older people like me should be crying because we're not as beautiful." Frank quipped and pretended to cry as well. "See?" The girl grew silent and chuckled. "You're not crying, I can see that," she said, wiping her tears and tilting her lips in a smile. "You're funny." "No, I'm crying. Please don't look at me. I look ugly when I cry," he added, burying his face behind his hands and pretending to cry loudly. At that, the girl, who couldn't have been more than 4 or 5 years old, couldn't stop laughing. "Okay, tell me, why are you crying?" she asked sweetly. As Frank peered between his hands and saw her smiling, he sat beside her and said, "Because I saw a pretty little girl crying." "But what is the pretty girl's name? Are you waiting for someone?" The girl smiled. "My name is July. I'm waiting for my grandma. She picks me up from kindergarten every day here, but she's late, and I was scared to be alone, so I started crying." "Is that all?" Frank gave her a warm smile. "Don't worry, I can help you. I'm Frank, by the way. Where do you live?" Julie shook her head. "We live in an old house around here, but I don't know the address because Granny picks me up every day." At this point, Frank didn't know what to do. It was freezing cold, and he couldn't leave Julie alone. He wanted to get her some hot chocolate, but he didn't have any money. He did, however, have a warm jacket that a kind man had given him days ago while he was shivering in the rain. He pulled out the jacket from his old, dirty sack and decided to give it to Julie. While putting it over her shoulder, he suddenly noticed the little girl had a name tag pinned to her coat and it had her address. "Oh, you've got your address here," he said, pointing to the tag. "May I take a look at it?" Julie unpinned the tag and handed it to him, and Frank noticed that the address was not far away. "Come on, let's go see your granny," he said, stretching his hand to Julie, who grabbed it tightly. After a couple of minutes, when Julie and Frank arrived at the address, Julie ran to the door. "Granny, I'm home," she chirped as she hurried inside. Frank thought it was strange that the door was left open, and when he followed Julie inside, he saw her grandmother unconscious on the floor on her stomach. "Oh no, Granny," she cried. "Wake up, Granny." Frank turned around and noticed a phone on the table. Fortunately, it was unlocked, so he contacted 911 right away. Then he checked on the woman, and when he turned her around, he couldn't believe his eyes. He was staring at the woman who had been responsible for his homelessness. Keeping their past aside, he decided to help her. "Madeline, wake up," he said, trying to stir her up, but she wouldn't wake up. Fortunately, an ambulance arrived quickly and brought her to the hospital. Frank escorted her there with Julie, assuring the little girl that her grandmother would be fine. When the doctors examined Madeline, they discovered she had suffered a stroke, which is why she'd collapsed. They thanked Frank for getting her to the hospital on time, as her life might have been in danger otherwise. Later, when Madeline gained consciousness and Frank went to meet her, she was startled to see him after all these years. "Oh God, Frank, what are you doing here?" she asked, her voice shaking. "Do you feel better now?" "Fortunately, I met Julie, and after I brought her home, and we found you unconscious, I called the ambulance and got you here." Julie ran up to her and hugged her. "Frank was kind to me, Granny. When you were sick, he took care of me." "Really? Oh, thank you, Frank." Julie's face flushed as she remembered what she'd done to Frank a long time ago. Several years ago, Frank was a teacher, and Madeline was his boss as the principal of the school where they both worked. Eventually, she developed feelings for Frank and proposed to him. However, Frank was already married to a woman named Laura and refused her. Madeline couldn't handle the rejection and fired him. She also issued him a negative character report so that he would never be hired as a teacher again. Frank and Laura lived in a little cottage, and while Frank was hunting for work, Laura was diagnosed with leukemia. He did not have enough money for her treatment and lost her. Laura's death left Frank devastated. He gave up on everything because his wife, whom he adored, was no longer with him. Unfortunately, Frank and Laura had no children, and he was alone after her death. Having lost everything, Frank started living as a beggar on the streets. All thanks to Madeline for ruining everything for him, to the point where he became homeless and lost all he owned. However, now that she saw him after all these years and learned how he'd saved her life, she regretted everything she'd done. "I'm sorry," she told him quietly, ashamed to see him in poor health after all these years. "I am truly sorry for what I did to you, Frank. I paid the price for what I did. You saved my life, but Granny?" Julie interjected. "Do you know Frank?" "Oh, sweetheart, I actually." Madeline didn't get to finish. "Your grandmother and I are friends." "July," Frank explained. "We had a little fight a while back, so we didn't talk to one another. Can you wait for us with the nurse outside? I'd like to end this fight with the grandmother. I don't want to cry again. She made me cry when we fought, and you know how ugly I look when I cry." Julie giggled. "Okay, I will wait outside. But Frank," she said before leaving, "you look funny while crying. Not ugly." As Julie left, Madeline broke down in tears. "I am very sorry, Frank. I have already paid for what I did." Julie's parents, my son and daughter-in-law, were killed in a car accident a few years ago, leaving her an orphan. I'm the only one she has right now. Oh, how much I troubled you, yet you saved my life. I am so sorry. I don't have any grievance against you or Julie, Madeline. Julie is a lovely girl, and I adore children. Anyway, being furious with you wouldn't bring back Laura or the years I have spent in anguish. Please take care of Julie," he murmured as he turned to walk away. But Madeline stopped him, still feeling terrible about what she'd done. She wanted to make amends for her sins, so she invited Frank to return to the school as a teacher. "I retired a while ago, but I can pull some strings for you," she said. But Frank refused. He was no longer sad and alone because he had found a friend in a pretty crying girl, whom he frequently met while she waited for her granny outside her school.